John was born in a small, remote village nestled between the hills, where the nearest hospital was miles away and electricity came only at dusk. His family, poor but filled with love, lived in a tiny house made of mud and thatch. His parents were farmers, working tirelessly in the fields for a meager living. They couldn't afford much, but they always made sure John had food and a bit of education. From a young age, John was determined to change his family's fate. He saw how his mother struggled with her health, often relying on traditional remedies because there was no doctor nearby. He promised himself that one day he would become a doctor and bring care to those who had none. The road ahead, however, was far from easy. His school was a small, crumbling building with only a few worn-out books. John's parents could not afford extra tuition or private lessons, but his hunger for knowledge pushed him forward. He would often study late into the night, using a dim kerosene lamp, reading textbooks borrowed from a kind teacher or the local library, if he was lucky to have access. During the harvest season, when his parents needed extra hands, John would work in the fields to help. His fingers blistered as he worked long hours, but he never complained. After a day of hard labor, he would rush back to his room, sit at the table, and continue his studies, determined not to let exhaustion or poverty stand in his way. There were days when he thought about giving up. The weight of his dreams often seemed too heavy for his small shoulders. Once, when his father fell ill and there was no money for a doctor, John spent sleepless nights trying to treat him with what little he knew. It was a terrifying experience, but it only strengthened his resolve. That night, as his father's fever broke, John swore he would never let anyone suffer from a lack of medical care again. When John graduated high school, he faced another enormous hurdle: money for college. The cost of medical school was beyond what his family could afford, but he didn't let that stop him. He applied for every scholarship, worked part-time jobs, and lived in cramped, inexpensive accommodations. Some nights, he fell asleep studying with a piece of bread in his hand because that was all he could afford to eat. Years of struggle passed, but John never gave up. He graduated from medical school at the top of his class, overcoming every obstacle that came his way. When he finally returned to his village, dressed in his doctor's white coat, the villagers could hardly believe their eyes. John had done it. He had become a doctor, not only to fulfill his dream, but to change the lives of those who had supported him along the way. His parents, beaming with pride, saw that their son had become the person they always knew he could be. Someone who would bring hope, healing, and a better future to the community. But for John, the journey didn't end there. His dream had always been to ensure that no one in his village would ever have to suffer from a lack of medical care again. And he would continue working tirelessly, day after day, helping those who needed him most, never forgetting the hard days that had shaped him into the doctor he had become.